It's a pleasure for me to come back. I'm happy that I was allowed to come back after the first time here. So thank you. And thank you to CPPR very much for hosting me here. As he said, there's a lot of speculation about Trump's presidency and what it means. And what I thought I would do is to make 5 broad points that would not look just at the US-India relations, because you really have to situate Trump in a broader context and then look at India. And although many of his cabinet positions have been filled now, there is still a question mark on some of the main foreign policy questions. So what I thought I would do is the 5 things that I'm going to talk very quickly is: 1, what is Trump's worldview? Okay, so just generally, what is his worldview? Second is, what would be his foreign policy style, his leadership style? Another is, third point, Trump's priorities globally and what it might mean for India. The fourth one would be Trump's Asian priorities and how it would impact India. And then the 5th and final is, what should India do in this case? So let me just take up each one quickly. So Trump's worldview, what are his sort of core beliefs, if you think about what a worldview is? I think what is interesting is that it's very difficult to say what they are, because in the past, he has been a Democrat, he has been an independent, and now he's a Republican. So clearly there is no consistency in what his political, ideological worldview has been. So that's important. Now, some of his close observers have said that he's one of the least self-reflective persons that one can meet. And therefore, again, very difficult to have to sort of interpret what his views are because of the lack of that kind of self-reflection. Basically, I think his own brand has been what has been the driving force in his life. Okay? Promoting his own brand. In a way, to think about sort of the object and the subject of his universe is himself. And in that sense, he sort of wrapped around the idea of Donald Trump. And you hear about the idea of India, the idea of the United States, and so forth. Here, I think you have to look at the idea of Trump. How has he defined himself and redefined himself over time? He really is, I think, a force unto himself. That's probably how you have to sort of look at it. Now, the voters, I think, one of the attractiveness of Trump for them was that he spoke what seemed to be on his mind. He had a sense of authenticity. There was no script whatsoever, because you never knew what he was going to say. Unlike Hillary Clinton, who, if you watched any of the debates, you can see very deliberate, very scripted. She had 5 points. She was going to make those 5 points no matter what. Trump did not have that, and I think that was one of the attractiveness. But I think I see him as being more opportunistic, actually, than being authentic. Because for authenticity, you have to have some core beliefs. So being opportunistic, we have to then figure out what makes a good deal for him. He's much more of a tactical, he uses a tactical approach rather than a long-term strategic kind of mentality for him. So in a way, it is to do whatever seems to work at that point in time. And he has been actually kind of open about that. He has said that even this thing, I don't know if you've heard this phrase that he kept saying, build a wall on the Mexican border. He said in some interview that actually that idea, he just happened to mention it in one of the rallies. And suddenly people started shouting that, build the wall, build the wall. And then he said, okay, that seems to work, I'll use it. So that's the kind of, build the wall, one thought it was a very well thought out kind of rallying cry. It was not. It was something that it seemed to work, and he did it. Now, he keeps flip-flopping also. The Middle East. He initially said that he was going to be much more balanced on Palestine and Israel. But then he gave a speech in May, I think it is, to a lobby group, an Israeli, a Jewish lobby group in the United States, very powerful one. He shifted his view after that. Even torture techniques. Initially he was very strong on, we'll do whatever. Then apparently there were those who told him, sometimes rather than waterboarding and all these very intense things, if you give a man some cigarettes and something that's a more incentive thing, he might actually talk more, might be more. And he actually then said, well, maybe that's the way to go. So what I'm trying to suggest is that he is, if you want to put it in a positive way, then he's actually quite flexible. That he does not have an ideology or a dogma that he's committed to. And so this is why I think, even though his cabinet has been selected to a large extent, there's a lot of uncertainty about what his policies are going to be, simply because of his nature, the nature of Trump himself. So that brings me to the second point that I want to say, and that is his foreign policy style, or his leadership style. And I think foreign policy style is important because, we all look at leadership styles as a clue to what we might expect in terms of his approach to other countries and other leaders. It seems like he's going to try to run his administration like a corporation. That's what he's used to. So I think that's what he will try to do. So he will have more of a top-down approach than a kind of consultative or setting up lots of committees and so on, which is the way it generally tends to work in the government. So, for example, every president for the last 40 years or so has been given a daily intelligence briefing. 8 a.m., White House, he's supposed to get a daily briefing. Apparently, he has already said he doesn't want one every day. He said normally they'll probably say the same things every day. So why should I listen to this waste time every single day? I want it maybe once a week, or better still, if there is something important for me to know, you let me know, I'll be there. Now, so that has again created a certain unsettling this thing in the establishment, because now they don't know how to handle him. This was their routine. So again, as I said, I think this is because his focus is going to be more on tactics rather than strategy. And this is in part because his mentality is one that is more of making deals rather than, having a deliberative sort of trying to figure out multiple points of views and come to a decision point. This is a big, big change from Obama, because one of Obama's, you can say that it's he was a man of thought rather than action in some sense, whereas I think I would describe Trump as a man of action, less thought. And now this can be dangerous, obviously, because you might jump into something or make assertions that are not backed by evidence or deep reflection. Now, one of the things that Trump had criticized Obama about was Obama's leadership style of being deliberative. For example, on the Middle East, when the Syrian crisis came up and Obama had to take certain decisions, he hesitated, he was prudent, he thought about it, he considered a variety of options, and he was very loath to take quick action. In fact, Hillary Clinton is the one who pushed him on Syria. He himself would not have even wanted to do as much as he did. Somebody in his administration also used the term that Obama's preference is to, quote, lead from behind, without having a big US footprint in the Middle East. Now, Trump really criticized that, saying that this is why the United States leadership is going down in the world's eyes, because this idea of leading from behind he completely trashed. So again, this is something that you will see different. So a lot of loose talk, as you can see, exaggerations, and I think in the international relations, words do matter. So, you know, it could create mini crisis. But on the other hand, within just 2 months after he's been elected, we see that many other countries and leaders are beginning to adjust to this situation. In other words, they're saying, well, perhaps you don't have to take everything he says seriously. And so what he's managed to get them to do is to react to him, rather than him having to react to anything else. So he has been able, before he even becomes president, he has been able to set the terms of discourse. For example, 2 phone calls. Okay, one call to the Taiwanese president, which is unprecedented, and his view was, what's the problem in me taking the phone and talking to another leader? And on the face of it, he's absolutely right. Why should the United States be so sensitive to China on something as simple as this? The other call, of course, was closer to home, Nawaz Sharif, who he said, awesome relations with US-Pakistan, terrific leader to Nawaz Sharif, amazing Pakistani people, and so on. So again, now, of course, I think here, I'm sure that there was obviously a lot of reaction to that. On the other hand, I think there were some who said that he also mentioned something like, the US stands ready to help Pakistan solve some of its major problems. Now, was that a hint that he wouldn't mind being a mediator in the Kashmir on Kashmir? Well, it's not clear what he meant. He may have just been saying something off the top of his head. So people, I think, are sort of giving allowance for that. So in any case, I think that that's not something that's going to happen, as we know. Once he comes to power, he's going to see what the reality is. But again, he has been able to control the communications to a degree that's quite astounding. And even his tweets, he is able to get the information out first. The news media is always one step behind him. And I think that's quite in terms of his communications, it's quite brilliant, because he is always setting the terms of discourse again. People are reacting to him. He doesn't, so he is able to formulate how he wants it, what kind of message he wants to get across, which has been Obama's huge problem. Obama has not been able to get, even despite the fact that the economy is doing fairly well, that he has wound down wars in Afghanistan and in Iraq and so on, he has not been able to get the message across. So controlling the message in this information age, I think, is absolutely critical. So the country or the leader who can control that message will have the upper hand. So the next thing is Trump's global priorities and India. First of all, I would say that his top priority is what he calls America first. And what does that mean? Basically that no more nation building abroad. You know, the project of nation building, whether it's Iraq or Afghanistan or Libya, Syria, wherever, which has been started with George Bush but continued under Obama and Clinton, I think will now not be a top priority, which means that his view is build up American infrastructure. America has to take care of its home before you go abroad. And so what does that mean for India? Well, I think actually it's not a bad thing, because if you look at some of the past humanitarian interventions, India has tended to be on the opposite side of the US, in the United Nations, for example, on many of these interventions abroad. And this will give India, it will provide a lessening of a distance between the US and India on that. Now, anti-terrorism, that I think is one of his top global priorities, no question about it. Here, of course, is going to be ISIS in the Middle East, Syria specifically, and again, this is something that should be, from India's point of view, something to be welcomed. But then what about South Asia and anti-terrorism? What would I say about that? Well, nearly almost all of Trump's national security team is on the record as being tough on Islamist terrorism, Islamist radicalism. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to translate into being tough on terrorism and extremism in South Asia. It's not going to translate in the way that the Indian government would like it to. So, as I mentioned, first of all, the phone call with Nawaz Sharif, again, so it's not clear that he's going to be so hard on Pakistan after all. He did make that, so I think that has to do with the fact that there are several people in his cabinet, especially the defense secretary, who has been a long-standing friend of the Pakistan military, General Mattis. And he has, so in some sense, under Trump, policy towards South Asian and terrorism will be more complicated. General Mattis, the defense secretary, was the former head of CENTCOM, which was the U.S. Central Command, which was under which Pakistan was in South Asia. So he was in fact the person who tried to calm things with Pakistan after Osama bin Laden's assassination, when the relationship went just completely downward spiraling. Obama sent Mattis to meet with the Pakistani military, Pakistani leaders, to try and smooth things out. And so, in fact, he was also the main person who went to US Congress while there was increasing frustration about Pakistan and terrorism. He was the one who went and said, no, they're doing quite a lot, that we need Pakistan's help in this, and we should be not putting sanctions on them and so forth. So he's actually, he is willing to give Pakistan a lot of leeway on that. But that's the defense secretary. The national security advisor, who is Flynn, General Flynn, has a different view. His position, he wrote a book in 2016 called The Field of Fight. And in it, he says that there are countries that pretend to be our friend. But, he said, if you are not going to choose to fight Islamic radicalism, then we are going to be very harsh on those so-called friends. And so, from the National Security Advisor's point of view, Pakistan has been playing a double game on Afghanistan. And that's something that they're not going to just let go very easily. So, in a sense, on India's important concern on terrorism, I would see a mixed picture. I think it will be more of the same. There will be some that want stronger action on Pakistan, but I don't think it's going to happen because, okay, that's not going to happen. Because Trump's focus is going to be on the Middle East, not terrorism in South Asia. The only thing that will be a bit of a change will be that they're going to continue to be engaged on Afghanistan, unlike Obama. So in some sense, that could work to India's advantage. That's one. This other point in the global arena is the resetting of the relationship with Russia. And I think again that's going to be advantageous to to India. Why? Because right now Russia has become isolated or trying to be isolated, which is very difficult for India given the long-standing relations with Russia. And in the meantime, the US has been pushing Russia and China closer together, and Pakistan. And because India has been seen as moving far too close to the United States. So I think if there is a rebalancing of relations with Russia by the United States, this will give India more room for its own choices in foreign policy. So I think that's a good outcome. Now, the only thing is that among the entire security officials, the Defense Secretary Mattis is not a big fan of Putin or of Russia. He's quite suspicious of Russia. Unlike the Secretary of State, who's a very close friend of Putin. So you're going to see some possible dynamics here. But I think Trump in this case is going to be going to have the main last say, and he will, of course, this is one of his top priorities. Okay, the fourth point that I want to raise is Trump's Asian priorities and what it might mean for India. The first one, of course, is challenging China on economics. Now, he has promised to slap 45% duties for goods and Chinese goods. And of course, what that will do is you're going to have to bring the Chinese back to the negotiating table. And here, because he's starting with a very strong, hard position, probably what he will do is come to some midpoint where there will be some concessions by the Chinese. Because for the Chinese, the last thing they want is a trade war. And this is again very reminiscent of the way Trump negotiates. It's not that this is his final. The 45% duty is not a final kind of policy. It's the beginning of negotiations. And so it's to gain negotiating advantage for himself, for the US. So in that sense, he's trying to get a better deal all the time. And he might from China, because again, as I said, China stands to lose a lot. But on this, of course, the challenge to China is based on a protectionism outlook by the United States. Now that's going to affect India as well, especially as India is trying to step up its exports, especially on software, where 60% or so of the income is from the United States market. It's a huge problem for India if this happens. So, the idea of make in India is likely going to clash with make in the US, which is Trump's motto. So those two, Trump's motto and Modi's motto, I think are destined to clash. Now, in fact, I think on trade, China and India are going to find themselves on the same side vis-a-vis the United States. So, on the one hand, a more difficult relations between China and the US will give India breathing space But on the other hand, I think the same negative impact on China will be similar to what India will face. So TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is going to go away, well, both China and India did not want that. And so that's one positive outcome that has happened. Because they would have been left out, India and China would have been left out of this huge trading bloc. And that would have been a very difficult thing for India. And what Trump wants to do is to have a lot of bilateral, one-on-one kind of treaties. If you look at India and the US, the bilateral investment treaty, which is a treaty that they've been trying to negotiate since 2009, it's not going to move forward very easily. So there's not a lot of scope for moving forward on trade as long as Trump takes a hard protectionist stand on this. Just recently, India was given the major defense partner status, and here there is scope for co-production and for co-development of defense technologies. But again, the problem is that Make in India is going to come up against the Trump's restrictions. So that again I see as having a problem. The other thing that Trump wants to do in Asia is to get Japan, South Korea and other allies to pay more for their defense and for the United States to pull back. That was a big objective that he said in his campaign. But the first person he met after he was elected was Shinzo Abe, Japanese Prime Minister. Once he met him, he has been saying something rather different. He's saying that one has to be more sensitive to the allies' needs and so forth. A complete flip-flop on that. So it's not, and at the same time, he's putting a lot more money into the U.S. Military spending and military build-up. Now you have to, if you're a military person, you may be wondering, what is this military build-up for? If you're simply going to, not going to use it. So even, or give it some kind of an objective. So even though he said that he's going to rely more on allies and pull back on the pivot to Asia. Obama had a pivot to Asia where 60% of US naval and air forces were going to be stationed in the Pacific as opposed to the Atlantic. Big change. He was going to give that up. He wanted to tone it down. Now, I think he's going to simply call it another name and continue with this. In fact, maybe even deepen the engagement. So that's in the Asia part. Now, finally, what should India do on this? Well, for me, I see two big foreign policy priorities for India at this point. And one is to consolidate India's economic development and rise as an economic powerhouse. To become a economically developed country. That is, I think, the number one priority for India. Number two priority for India, in my view, is to maintain a balance of power in Asia that is not China-centric only. So on the economic and the military. Now, what does this mean, though? How can India go about this under the new Trump administration? First of all, I think India has to get into what can be called a transactional mode with the United States. Transactional mode meaning, I think there's no choice, because that is the way the new Trump is going to interact. Perhaps he'll evolve over time and see India more as a strategic partner, but I don't see it happening very quickly. And in some sense, my suspicion is that many Indians would prefer a transactional arrangement or a relationship with the United States rather than a kind of a tight, close-knit relationship with the United States. And so this may be, in some sense, playing to Indian preferences. So on issue-by-issue area, try to get what India wants for its own self. The second thing is to think of the US as first among equals, meaning among other major powers, Russia, Japan, China, that the United States be thought of as first, but among equals, because I think it's very, very important for India to have good relations with this extended neighborhood. And the United States is showing that it can be quite fickle, and therefore I think it behooves India to have that, rather than as some Indian analysts have been in the last 5-10 years pushing India kind of into the US embrace. I think it's probably a mistake to put all the eggs into the US basket. Whether it is the Indian Ocean, I think, which I think is going to be a big challenge, especially with Chinese maritime Silk Road and so forth. But my own view is that India has a big strategic premium within the Indian Ocean, and I think there's no reason to become overly concerned about the Chinese, because there are, I can go into it later, but lots of ways in which India has advantages to play against the Chinese. Ultimately, what I would say is that a large rising power like India, I don't think can rely on another large power like the United States for its own security and for its own interests. Because every large power is going to have their own interests, and they cannot be relied on for a long-term strategic partner. So in some sense, maintaining Indian strategic independence as it has in the past, not exactly like in the Nehru period, but much more flexibility, seems to me makes much more sense. And in that sense, to have a peaceful extended neighborhood while Indian economy is growing and while you need that, I think should be the top priority. And so if it means a transactional relationship with the United States and not a strategic one, I think that's a smart move for India. So let me stop. I've gone on too long, but thank you.